so excited to be here for DevOps Days London. I craned my neck and tried to see about how many people were new to DevOps Days, but I'm going to ask that question one more time so I can actually see. How many of you at your first DevOps Days? I'm going to say at least 85% of the room, possibly more. That's fantastic. So if you don't know me, I'm Bridget Krumhout. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I work for Pivotal as a principal technologist on Cloud Foundry. I co-host the podcast Arrested DevOps, which some of you may have heard from time to time. And I'm part of the global committee organizing DevOps Days. So that means that when cities around the world are interested in hosting a DevOps Days, we encourage them, give them feedback, give them ideas, and listen to their ideas. And the ideas I've seen coming out of London are great. Like, I'm really glad that people are realizing everywhere that DevOps is something that all of us can do. And all of us can take part in this community. And it is a community, it's a global community that has been going on for, years now. Let's talk a little bit, before we go into more detail about the history of DevOps Days, let's talk a little bit about DevOps, the stuff that we're trying to accomplish, the goals that we have, and why organizations maybe start doing this. If you look at this quote, and if you can't read that, it says, in the last week, 67 deploys, 496 changes, 18 people. And I've asked people, in recent weeks, when they thought this quote was from. And this room is big enough, I'm not gonna ask everybody here to shout that out. But I've gotten answers ranging from last week, last year, maybe 4 years ago, I got yesterday. And this is actually from 2008. So these ideas of moving quickly and development and operation teams working well together are not new. John Alspaugh and Paul Hammond talked about this dev and ops cooperation at Flickr in a talk at Velocity in 2009. So we kind of wonder, in many of our organizations today, we still can't do this. Flickr could do this in 2008, and many organizations today still can't. So let's talk about why. Like, why can we not move that fast today in many organizations? We could talk about it's not easy to get a development environment, or it's not easy to get one that looks like production. Or maybe people's deploy processes are really manual. Maybe, the change advisory board requires that 42-page checklist. And you think to yourself, how do people deploy more than one time a day if they have really heavyweight processes? And the reaction to failure is something that we've talked about a lot in the DevOps community. We talk about things like blameless postmortems. And we talk about those for a reason, and not just because we're all about DevOps being hugs and singing Kumbaya. I mean, hug ops is a thing, but we also care a lot about people being forthright about what went wrong with a deploy, which means that they have to feel safe in the environment of talking about it. So, and then of course, recovering from that failure. I mean, a lot of organizations right now are struggling with how do we actually improve along all of these axes? And I think a lot of people have come to realize that it's not just about automation, right? Side note, in this picture, I think maybe he's trying to use the napkin. But if you think about what are we trying to accomplish, most of us are not here just because we want to Docker all the Dockers. I like Docker a lot, but we're not here just to do that, right? For our organizations, whether we're in finance or other, we're usually trying to bring better value to our stakeholders. I was having lunch yesterday with the fine folks at the UK's Government Digital Services. And they might not be looking for the bottom line. They might not be looking for profit like a lot of finance companies are. But they're certainly trying to give you a better experience and using a lot of DevOps principles and practices to do that. The classic wall of confusion that you've seen in the dev and ops presentations forever, I think about the wall of confusion and code being thrown over the wall from development to the hapless folks in ops. But I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, right? It's kind of like you've got development is being incented to ship features, and if operations is being incented to seek stability, then you may have, unfortunately, set up groups that are diametrically opposed to each other's goals. So from a top down, from the C-suite on down, if you want to embrace DevOps in your organization, you have to make sure that people aren't only incented to try to stop each other, but instead incented to try to work with each other. So back to the history of DevOps days. In 2008, there was and Chris is sitting in the front row, so he can check me to see how accurate any of this is. But in 2008, there was Patrick Dubois of Belgium and Andrew Clay Schaefer of the US and a few other individuals out there, including Chris, they started a Google group, mailing list about Agile Systems Administration. And at the Agile Roots Conference in 2008, Andrew Clay Schaefer posted a notice saying he wanted to have a birds of a feather session about applying the principles of Agile to systems administration. And then he thought, no one's going to go to that, so he didn't even show up. Patrick Dubois was the only person who showed up for Andrew's session. So he had to go track him down later and say, I want to talk about this. How do we apply Agile to systems administration? They talked. Patrick went back to Belgium, and with Chris and some other folks, got DevOps Days Belgium going in 2009. That was the first one. It was the only one in 2009. And there were 4 in 2010, and I think we're probably to, 20, 25, more than that for this year. So scale-wise, it's kind of got the whole hockey stick growth thing going. And I think there's a reason for that. And it's not that DevOps is something that you're going to get certified in, though the 5-year anniversary badges at DevOps Days Belgium were a certificate of DevOps. I got Patrick Dubois to sign mine. And it's not that DevOps is, something that you can just get in a box. So we did get a box of Belgium chocolates, and they were delicious. But it's kind of funny, right? But that's not really DevOps. Like, DevOps is not this shiny thing that you get in a box that you see on your balance sheet and that you can definitely finish your DevOps initiative in Q2 and see the ROI from it. Like, a lot of us think of things that way, but that's not something that you can do with DevOps, right? Like that, unlike in this, funny video script Rob put out a couple of years ago, that shiny box doesn't actually exist because DevOps is something that you have to choose and do inside your organization. It's a cultural practice of cooperation and sharing. And it's also not something that you achieve through tools alone. This picture is not photoshopped, except for the word DevOps. There was not actually DevOps in that shipping container. But I took this picture in Minneapolis where I live, where we apparently live in a land of DevOps cliches because we've got shipping containers and silos and clouds. And I think behind my Twitter handle there's like some tires, probably the slow-burning tire fire that is Prad, right? And what really struck me about this is that people think that if they get the right tools, if they go to cloud, or if they break down those silos, possibly by adding some containers, they will have achieved DevOps. Like, what I'm here to tell you is the tools are necessary, certainly. It's very difficult to do DevOps without any tooling whatsoever. They're certainly not sufficient. And you can look at people, like, for example, I mentioned John Allspaw earlier. He's CTO at Etsy now, and they're great with DevOps. They also don't use cloud or containers. So, like, you don't need those things in order to to dev all the ops. Like, that's not what you need. What you need is cooperation and sharing with your teams, as well as having automation. And just kind of a side note on things like microservices. So, again, a lot of people, especially if they talk to vendors, consultants, et cetera, think that what they need to do is they need to rewrite all of their software. I mean, possibly there's software that you need to rewrite, but make it work better in the cloud or whatever. But going in from a point of view of we can't DevOps because we don't have time to rewrite everything. Like, you don't have to rewrite all your software in order to have DevOps. You don't even need to re-architect your entire organization, restructure your entire org chart into two-pizza teams, which, by the way, I kind of quibble with that because I'm like, how hungry are these people? And how big are these pizzas? Like, I don't know. But if you think about it, the idea of having a small cross-functional team is so that they can move faster. And in some parts of your organization and on some projects, that might work super well. In other parts of your organization, maybe you don't need that. Note that I am not in any way advocating for bimodal. I think under no circumstances should you break your organization up into sad mode and awesome mode. That's a terrible idea. We're going to get a great talk on that later. But I want to point out what I think is the most important word in Conway's Law, because people use Conway's Law a lot when they're talking about DevOps and they're talking about restructuring their organizations. And they say, well, I mean, if we're going to have our software look in this way, then we're going to have to build our organization to look exactly like that. And I think the word that they're leaving out, that they're not realizing, is in there. And if you're not familiar with Conway's Law, by the way, it was Mel Conway wrote this paper in 1967. It was published in 1968. It was called How Committees Invent. Apparently papers were not exciting in the 60s, I don't know, but for whatever reason, people read all the way to the end and got to this exciting part, which is he's talking about how if an organization builds systems, it's constrained to design systems that are a copy of the organization's communication structure, not the organization's structure. So that's me kind of being the bomb-flinging anarchist in, like, you know, the conference talk circuit where a lot of people say organization structure. And I'm like, no, we're leaving out the most important word. The communication there is what makes the DevOps stuff possible. Another thing that's really important when you're thinking about the DevOps transformation you're trying to do inside your organization, and you're trying to see if it's even working, is a lot of people look at what works for other organizations and try to measure themselves by that. But remember, like when you're evaluating progress, you have to look at what works for your organization, for your specific use case. This is a case of benevolent neglect. Too many conferences last summer meant that my spouse and I ignored our garden. And those yellow squash are patty pan squash that should not, under any circumstances, be that much bigger than our tomatoes. And they should be smaller than my fist. They were completely inedible, but they were certainly giant. So if you're measuring something by how much budget did we allocate to this, or how many people did we put on that team, or how many lines of code did we write, like, even if one of those might be correlated with someone else's success, like, look at what actually works for you inside your organization. If you look at, you know, Gene is here and some other folks who have worked on the DevOps survey of practice will tell you that there are many behaviors that are correlated with success that you will look at and say, let's try that. But when you're evaluating yourself, don't forget to look at the value that's created for your organization. Something else to keep in mind when you're making this transformation is that you probably have all of the procedures and processes in place in your organization because you need them, because of something that happened in the past. You know, item 67 on that deployment checklist is there because that one time someone accidentally put something in the wrong load balancer, right? Because there was a manual process at that time that might be completely gone now. This sticker was, for Velocity Amsterdam last year, was in every bathroom in this hotel. People started tweeting pictures of it because we were all kind of surprised. And if you can't read it, it says in several languages, we kindly request you to take your shower in the bathtub. And I think, what happened in this hotel that they felt the need to print these stickers and put them in every bathroom? But probably something happened, and then that became, we have to put this in every bathroom from now on. Who knows if it didn't look like it was possible to do that with their shower. And yet, maybe they remodeled the showers and they still kept that sticker in place. So like, one thing that at Pivotal, we work a lot with organizations that are doing IT transformation. And Andy Zitney, the CTO at Allstate Insurance, said that they needed to actually let themselves not, give themselves permission to move away from their old processes when moving into their new platform. Because like, if they stuck to everything that was the rule and necessary when they had completely different technology, they would be sticking to things they didn't need anymore. So you have to be willing to actually change. Something else that kind of seems like there's way too much to keep up on is you start thinking, wait a minute, so all these successful organizations are getting themselves a bunch of containers and then orchestrating them in some way, and we're just getting some virtualization, or maybe we're just getting some configuration management. Like, are we in trouble? What are we supposed to do? I think that staying on top of this stuff and learning everything about every detail is a pretty large undertaking, even if that's your entire job. And you also are probably not going to base your architecture on running like a Markov bot on the front page of Hacker News. I mean, you could, but probably that's not how you're going to get the architecture that's going to be the most successful for you. So figuring out what your actual needs are, talking to people, vendors, partners, people at DevOps Days conferences about what works for them, and then figuring out which part you need to do now, because again, you don't necessarily need to build that perfect second system while you're still using your old one. I mean, like, iterate slowly. We know, like, the whole, you know, we're gonna hear from Joanne about lean. Like, the whole lean and agile principles are make those slow iterations towards success. If you are looking for some wisdom from some other people, O'Reilly is coming out with a book called Effective DevOps very soon. It's in pre-release right now, and I think it's going to be in the complete version like very soon. And Catherine Daniels and Jennifer Davis have a lot of good information in there. And I think one of the key concepts is that we need all of this tooling. We also need the humans to be closely involved in the process. And so when it comes to this idea of DevOps and buying some DevOps, I got news for you, right? People could try to sell you some DevOps, but you can't actually buy it. I mean, they can sell it to you, but you're not going to actually have achieved DevOps by paying them. Somebody can sell you some assistance with your DevOps transformation, and that's super. But DevOps is something you have to do, right? It's a cultural practice. And in organizations where you already have customers and money and things that you are trying to migrate out of your legacy, just remember, if the legacy stuff didn't matter, you would just turn it off and just go stand up the greenfield stuff. The legacy stuff matters for a reason, probably because your customers and money are in the legacy systems. So you need to use these practices and new tools where it's appropriate in order to make that transition. Not be disrupted out of existence, because my boss at Pivotal, Andrew Clay Schaefer, I actually work for Schaefer now. And one of the things that he likes to do is quote Deming. And Deming says, it's not necessary to change. Good news, you don't have to change. Bad news, it's also not necessary. It's not mandatory to survive, right? Survival's not mandatory. So we all know we don't want to be that sad snowman. This, by the way, was April in Minnesota. We do get a lot of snow. But the snowman didn't last much longer than that April day. And I think about the organizations that are working on making that leap forward. And a lot of them, I go in and I talk to a lot of customers who are trying to figure out what's right for them. What should they do next? There's an awful lot of all the things. And I think that the answer you're going to get is, especially the answer you're going to get here, is it depends, but also you have so many peers here to share with that you're going to be able to get those answers from. And so that's my pitch to you is, in the morning, DevOps Days is broadcast. You're hearing us talk from a stage, and we have a wireless lav and a speaker remote, so we must be right? It's I'm a person just like you. I do some things right, I probably do plenty of things wrong. But when you get into the open space, attendee-suggested discussions in the afternoon, that's when you're talking to your peers and finding out exactly what they've tried lately and what has worked for them and what hasn't. So we're going to, after lunch, we're going to have, come up and suggest topics. And as you're listening to speakers in the morning, that's the time for you to start thinking about, well, wait a minute, they didn't talk about this, or I really agree with that and I want to hear more, or I really disagree with that and I want to hear why they said that. Some of the speakers might suggest a topic, but nothing stops everyone in the room from suggesting a topic for the open space attendee-suggested discussion breakouts in the afternoon. So that's, a lot of people say when they come to DevOps Days that they're excited about the talks on the program, but then afterwards they say, I think a lot of the value I got was those discussions with my peers. So I definitely recommend that you think about, even if you don't suggest a topic, think about which ones interest you. And remember, even if you suggest a topic, it can be a topic you want to hear more about, not a topic you're going to present on or that you're an expert on. So that's one of the places at DevOps Days that you're going to get a lot of value. Something else to consider, too, is if you're seeing us on the stage and thinking, I could do that, there are a number of other DevOps Days in Europe this year. So, and most of them have their call for participation open right now. So you can go to devopsdays.org and put your idea in. Say, at our organization, we've learned this, we've tried this is what worked for us. And if you want to go visit Istanbul or Oslo or Amsterdam, you could maybe give one of those talks. Kiel already has their program set, and it's going to be a pretty good one. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Basically, the one thing I guess I want you to take away from this, other than participate in open space, is that DevOps is not a destination that you get to and you're like, yes, I have DevOps now. DevOps is a journey, but you're not alone on it. You're not on this empty road by yourself. We're all in this together. So I'm really glad that I'm here with you and that you're all here to listen and share your experiences, because I think it's going to be fantastic. So thank you very much. And with that, we're going to, I think, have Joanne up next. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to take